Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to dive into the absolutely fascinating world of statutory interpretation. We so often think of Parliament as the ultimate rulemakers. They write the laws and that's that, right? Well, actually, what happens when those perfectly written laws crash headfirst into the incredibly messy reality of human behavior? As you'll see, the courtroom is way more dynamic than just someone reading out loud from a dusty rulebook.
And that brings us to the ultimate puzzle. What exactly does a judge do when the words written by Parliament are ambiguous, completely broken, or just lead to an absolutely absurd outcome? Think about it. A judge can't just throw their hands up and say, well, this makes no sense, case dismissed. No way. They have to solve the puzzle. They have to interpret the law and actually find a practical way to apply it.
To understand how they do this, we really need to look at the crucial distinction between the two sides of the law. On one side, we have parliamentary lawmaking. Because the UK is a parliamentary democracy, the vast majority of laws are made by politicians passing acts, which are also called statutes or legislation. It's kind of like writing a giant blueprint. But on the exact opposite side, we have judicial lawmaking, specifically through something called statutory interpretation. See, Parliament creates the laws, but it is entirely up to the judiciary to apply them on the ground. This means judges are actively working with the law, and sometimes, using specific statutory rules, they even have to tweak it slightly just to make it function in the real world.
So here's our agenda for today. 1. Laws versus real life. 2. The literal rule. 3. The golden rule. 4. The mischief rule. And 5. Judges shaping true justice.
Okay, starting right off with Section 1, Laws versus Real Life.
When a statute is finally put to the test in the courtroom, judges don't just guess. They have a very specific progression of strategies, like a toolkit. There are 3 progressive steps they use to ensure true justice is maintained. They always start at Step 1 with the literal rule. If that causes problems, they escalate to Step 2, the golden rule. And finally, if things are really broken, they move to Step 3, the mischief rule.
Let's look closer at Section 2, the literal rule.
So, under the literal rule, the judge essentially acts as a human dictionary. That's really the best way to think about it. They take the exact, literal definition of the words written by Parliament and they apply them, full stop. They aren't looking for hidden meanings, they aren't reading between the lines, and they aren't looking at the broader context. They strictly read the text. And it's important to remember, this is the default starting point for any judge interpreting an act of Parliament.
But here's the catch, and the case of LNR v. Berriman illustrates this perfectly, and honestly quite tragically. In this case, a railway worker was killed while oiling the tracks. Now, the statute stated that compensation is given if workers are relaying or repairing the tracks. Because the judge applied the strict dictionary definition of those words, oiling was deemed maintaining, not relaying or repairing. Consequently, the worker's widow received absolutely no compensation. It's a really stark reminder of the harsh reality of relying solely on a dictionary. A strict interpretation solves the immediate legal puzzle, sure, but it can sometimes lead to devastating real-world outcomes.
Which naturally leads us to Section 3, the golden rule. You see, cases like Berriman pose a massive challenge for the courts. If sticking to the exact, literal words makes the outcome completely illogical, or frankly just absurd, the judge can't just enforce nonsense. They need an escape hatch. They need to reach for the next tool in their kit.
Enter the golden rule. Think of this as the judge's light bulb moment of pure common sense. If applying the strict literal rule leads to a completely ridiculous outcome, the judge is allowed to make a tiny amendment to the law's wording, just enough to clarify it and avoid that absurdity. It's a real game changer because it allows them to save the integrity of the justice system without completely throwing out the statute.
We see exactly how this works in a case called Adler v. George. So, the law made it an offense to obstruct His Majesty's forces in the vicinity of a prohibited place. The defendant tried to pull a fast one and argued he shouldn't be charged because he was actually inside the prohibited place, not just in the vicinity or near it. I mean, literally, strictly speaking by the dictionary, he was right. But come on, that is an incredibly absurd loophole. So the judge used the golden rule, tweaking the interpretation slightly to mean in or in the vicinity of. This fixed the absurdity instantly and ensured the law was clear and actually functioned the way it was meant to.
All right, moving on to Section 4, the mischief rule. So what happens when a small tweak isn't enough? This brings us to the mischief rule. This is the heavy machinery in the toolkit. This is where the judge pulls out a massive wrench and actively goes in to rework the law. If a statute is fundamentally ambiguous or just totally broken, the judge looks back at the actual mischief,
the specific problem Parliament was originally trying to stop, and they turn the wrench to ensure the law actually fixes that exact problem.
The case of Smith v. Hughes is a fantastic example of this wrench at work. The Street Offenses Act made it illegal for prostitutes to solicit in a street. Well, the defendants in this case were technically standing on balconies and tapping on windows from inside a house, so they argued they weren't literally in the street. Instead of letting them off on a massive technicality, the judge looked at the core mischief Parliament wanted to stop, which was the harassment of regular people walking down the street. So the judge took out the wrench and reworked the application to cover soliciting directed at the street, regardless of where the person was physically standing. The law was effectively fixed to match its true intent.
Finally, let's wrap this up with Section 5, Judges Shaping True Justice.
Looking back at this whole toolkit, we can clearly see the progression. It's brilliant, really. The literal rule relies strictly on the dictionary. Then, the golden rule applies those common-sense lightbulb moments to fix absurdities. And when all else fails, the mischief rule takes a wrench to completely rework broken or ambiguous wording. What this really highlights is that judges aren't just passive, robotic readers just echoing Parliament. They are highly active participants who literally shape how justice affects everyday people in the real world.
And that leaves us with a pretty profound question to chew on long after this explainer ends. Think about this. When a judge wields these tools, when they are tweaking, amending, and taking a wrench to rework the rules just to make them function, are they merely interpreting the law, or are they quietly writing it? Thanks so much for exploring the Judge's Toolkit with us today. Keep questioning and keep learning.